Sloan.
I'm Tristan Merriam.
And this is The Colorist,
a podcast about colour and its influence on our lives.
So today what we're going to be talking about is Capri Pink, because we're going to be basing every episode on a colour and moving backwards to explain where it comes from and its history, etc.
But before we get into all that, maybe we should say a little bit about who we are, why we're here, and what we're doing. That wasn't meant for the recording, but I thought, oops, we've forgotten that bit.
I can't wait to do it, that's why. Gosh. So for the people who don't have a clue who I am, I've been looking at colour and pigments and everything around that area for at least 50 years, actually much more. I went to art school in 1966, that long ago, and I came from a very creative and arty family. So I started making paint 35 years ago, and it's called chalk paint. And every colour I make is informed by my knowledge of paints. I'm quite nerdy about it, about pigments, about art, colour, science and styles. So it's all informed by that. And I love talking about it. I love thinking about it and just and telling people. I work with painters and retailers all over the world, including Tristan Merriam of Doghead Designs.
Hello.
Who's our brand ambassador and has a fierce and fiery interest in all things creative.
Oh, I'll use that on something. I'll put that on my website. Well, I don't have as much knowledge as Annie, but I think the first fairly important point this podcast has raised is who exactly am I? It's a really hard question to answer on something like this. But I am first and foremost a furniture painter and upcycler. As Annie said, I'm a brand ambassador for Annie Sloan and a chalk paint stockist. Up until just over 6 years ago, I was a primary school head teacher, but discovered Annie's paint after attending a workshop, and it really did change my life. I quite literally fell in love with it there and then, and that day decided to take a huge risk by handing in my notice and starting a more creative career path. So 6 years down the line, I am a small business owner, and I run an independent shop near Bristol called Doghead Designs, where I champion local artists and makers, as well as my own painted furniture. I'm also on a BBC TV show called Money for Nothing, and I love all things textured, colourful, and creative. Unlike Annie, I am not art trained and here to soak up all of Annie's knowledge and creative influence. So let's get going with episode number 1, which I'm very, very excited about. And Annie, if you want to introduce what this is going to be about and what the listeners can expect.
So every episode is going to be based on a colour. So this time it's going to be Capri Pink. And each time I will talk about the background, the history, the whatever it is, because each colour has a special thing about it. So Capri Pink is named, they've all got good names, but this one is named because for me, it was a very 50s colour. And I was brought up in the 50s. And Capri pants, the island of Capri, little beautiful blondes in little scarves, little headscarves. And
was that you? Are you describing yourself?
No, it was the woman
the beautiful
that I probably...
little blonde.
No, yeah, not me
with
at all.
The pink hot pants on.
Not me at all. But I looked at these they were a symbol of this sort of particular, very racy and gorgeous life. And they would be in a little lambretta, going off with their little capri pants, probably in bright pink. So that was partly why I wanted, and I thought it was I loved that idea. But really, the colour was inspired by Elsa Schiaparelli, who she died in 1973, was an amazing designer who, for me, is synonymous with the name Shocking Pink. Mm-hmm. And as a child, I remember people talking about Shocking Pink. I had no idea about Schiaparelli or anything, but I knew Shocking Pink. It was what people talked about. It was interesting and a bit wild and a bit wonderful. But I couldn't use the name Schiaparelli for the paint.
That was my question. I was about to ask, why then did you not call it Schiaparelli Pink?
because it's registered with the trademarked with everybody,
Okay.
and I couldn't have done it. So sadly, because I would have loved to have done that, because that would have nailed it.
Yes.
But we still have this word, and I didn't want to call it shocking pink, partly because there's a lot of other shocking pinks out there, and it is shocking, but it's not so shocking. It's not luminous colour. It's a really, I think, a very, very beautiful and quite sophisticated colour, which is what Schiaparelli was. So Schiaparelli was a designer from the sort of early part of the 1900s, about 1920s, I think, mainly about 1930s is when she's really, really going for it. 1937, she seemed to produce everything. But what I loved about her was, as I say, she made a perfume called Shocking Pink. One of the things about it was it is in an incredible bottle.
Yes.
And that bottle was based, it's a woman's shape.
I was going to say a female torso sort of thing. Yeah.
Do you know who it was based on, that figure?
Not herself.
No.
No.
Mae West.
Okay.
So Mae West was a big actress of the time, very voluptuous and incredibly sexy.
If you do say so.
Well, that was the point. She was very suggestive and very naughty.
Uh-huh.
There were lots of things that she would say, like, "Is that a gun in your pocket, or are you just pleased to see me?"
Well, I think that's clearly something Schiaparelli was interested in, that element of shock and designs that made people kind of sit up and take interest. They were designed to cause conversation, cause a stir, ruffle a few feathers.
Yeah. Oh, definitely, definitely. And what she loved doing was working with other artists. And I think she was not an artist so much as a designer, but she loved to work with artists who were, like, a lot of them were surrealists and Dada people. And so they were people that were sort of on the edge of art as well.
So what were some of her, I mean, people might have heard the name Schiaparelli and might know a little bit, or just think of one iconic thing, whether it's Shocking Pink or the perfume or a particular outfit she designed. What would you say some of her most iconic creations were? A few spring to mind for me, but I'd be interested to hear.
What do you think of when you say Schiaparelli?
Well, before researching this podcast and sort of finding out that we're basing it on Schiaparelli, I think the pieces I'd heard of were the hat in the shape of a high heel, the purse in the shape of a telephone, and also the lobster dress.
Right.
Because I've actually done a few paintings with a lobster theme, and they weren't based on that knowledge of Schiaparelli, but it was interesting when I later learned that's what she was famous for.
Yeah.
That I thought, lobsters are cool.
Interesting, lobsters have come through partly because she did it, but it's not just her that did it. It was actually Dali, the Salvador Dali, the surrealist or whatever you like to call him, painter. And so because they were being used, she then used it, and that sort of carried on.
And a very wonderful way of bringing together the arts generally, whether it's poetry, art, fashion.
So she worked with Dali, who was one of the great painters of the time, who did outrageous things, surrealist things. Surrealist meaning that it is sort of not real, basically, and it comes from the dream, it comes from subconscious, where you're putting two things together which you would normally not ever have together. And that's what surrealism is. And so she was finding that really, really exciting. And so she worked with him. He did a design which is a lobster on an evening dress, scattered with bits of parsley. So the idea of a lobster, which is food, with parsley on it is a bit crazy, but it worked. And it is so, I mean, I think it's a beautiful, beautiful dress.
It's an amazing dress. Yeah. If you don't know the one we're talking about, it's very easy to find, and it's just so random. And I think that at the time would have just caused such controversy, I suppose, because it was so different to what other things that were being created. I've got a quote here where she said working with artists like the ones we've mentioned and more gave one a sense of exhilaration. And I think her designs in collaboration with these artists were quite exhilarating to look at, and they still are.
Yeah, that's
I find
great.
them very inspiring.
Yes. Oh, they are. That's a nice quote. I've got another quote, which was, one felt supported and understood beyond the crude and boring reality of merely making a dress to sell. So that's why she worked with these people to sort of make it, spice it up, basically, which I think is great.
And she only needs to sell one dress with
Yes.
a lobster on, and that's her made. She doesn't want to sell hundreds of them. It's just about the one thing.
Yeah, I think who was... oh God, I've forgotten. Wallace Simpson, the wife of the Prince of Wales, who would have been our king, who had to abdicate. She was photographed in that dress with the lobster on it, and that made. I mean, everybody was talking about it and that was shocking as well.
Well, that's where I suppose the links to
event.
the art come in, because the artists were creating and are creating pieces that cause discussion and evoke feeling, and she wanted to bring that into fashion, which I think is very exciting.
Well, it's very exciting.
So moving back to Capri Pink and this shade of magenta, which became known as Schiaparelli Pink. She was very famous for it. Was this the first time in the world that this colour was really made popular? Had it been around before, or was this the first time it was really becoming a household name and recognisable?
Well, I think what would have happened is at the beginning of the 20th century, there were big developments in chemistry, basically, and that you could make stronger, brighter and cheaper colours that would be available to everybody. Stronger dyes, so that, before that, it wasn't that long before in Victorian times, in the middle of the 19th century, when you could get a deep burgundy, that deep carmine colour. You couldn't get that before then. So suddenly, this is not that much later, about 70 years, I suppose, that suddenly you were getting not just a deep burgundy, but a brilliant,
much
bright,
more vivid version.
Very vivid, yeah,
So
exactly.
her friend, the socialite Daisy Fellows, described this colour as bright, impossible, impudent, becoming, life-giving, like all the lights and the birds and the fish in the world, but together, a colour of China and Peru, but not of the West, a shocking colour, pure and undiluted. And I love that, because that packs a punch in itself, doesn't it?
Absolutely. I love it being an impudent colour.
Yes.
That's really naughty, isn't it?
Yes, exactly.
Fantastic.
And like all the lights and all the birds and the fish in the world are just very
fabulous.
poetically written.
Absolutely beautiful. I've not heard that one either, so that's fantastic.
Well, I'm teaching you something.
Yes, you are. You are. Well, this is what's all part of it.
Not
isn't
much,
it?
but a little bit here and there.
I love the fact that she also talked about China. What did she say? China and
Peru,
Asia. Peru.
Yes.
So that would be about, the colours of parrots and, because you do get some extraordinary bright colours. And of course, in India, you get this very, very bright pinks. Now, I don't know, at that time, there would have been a little bit of that, but that would have been new to the Western world entirely. And I think probably not that really vivid and naughty, shocking pink that we now have, because chemicals have made it more possible.
Yeah, and this is your nerdy fascination with science.
Absolutely.
And alchemy and the way it's done, which we could do a whole other episode on.
Well, I just love that. I do. I think that's amazing. Go on.
But drawing on the Indian reference, I think a lot of people who I speak to in the shop and wherever really, whilst doing workshops, people I speak to tend to think of Capri as being inspired by India, as in you creating the colour Capri from your visits to India.
I know.
So it's quite interesting to learn that whilst there's a huge influence with that colour in India, it actually came from a totally different inspiration.
Totally different. No, when I first wanted to do it, because every time I bring out a colour, when I bring it out, it's taken probably at least a year or probably a year for it to develop, for me to get the right colours, because I've got to mix it, test it, work it out, look at it, all that sort of stuff. So it takes quite a long time, and then to, find a name for it, everything. So I don't think I'd been to India at that point. So India for me was, but I knew, of course, I'd looked at loads and loads of Indian fabrics and and bought loads of stuff, so I did know that colour. But when I went to India, I was pretty well knocked out by the fact that pink, that bright pink, goes incredibly bright orange and a incredible viridian green and an amazing purple. Absolutely beautiful. But really, no, it was Schiaparelli and Shocking Pink. So can I tell you a story about Shocking Pink? So when I first wanted to do it, I just had this very strong desire to make a very bright pink. Now, I don't know where that comes from, but suddenly there's a need. I just feel it. I think that's, there's nothing magical. I think it's if you're in the world of colour and you're looking and you're painting, you suddenly think, I need this colour, I need this colour, I need it. And I told everybody at my work, I'm going to be doing this. And someone from my marketing department drew me aside and whispered in my ear, Annie, don't do this colour. No one will buy it. And of course, that sort of
fired you up even more.
Red rag to a bull, yeah. So I went, well, that's interesting. But I did take care. I did listen. But I did think, well, actually, one thing you've got to learn, you've got to trust your gut.
Yes. And this leads me on perfectly because I am going to liken you to Schiaparelli.
Oh.
Because upon reading about her and her early life and her career, she was a very driven person. She was very headstrong from what I've read. She actually ran away from her family in Rome and worked in the United States. And she sort of left behind this luxury lifestyle to pursue her own path. And coming back to what you said, trust her instincts, I assume, and sort of stay true to what she believed in, which I think came into all of her designs. It was different. It was something she believed in that she wanted to push. And this quote I found, I'm not sure where it's from, whether it's from her autobiography or some piece of work that was written about her, but it says, her method of approach relied on both impulse of the moment and the serendipitous inspiration as the work progressed. Perfect. And I think that sums it up really well. And it was actually to the detriment of, to the contribution rather, of her demise and the business sort of going under. Is that correct?
Well, I think what happened is that the war happened because she did a lot of these things, like I said, 1937. So that was just before the outbreak of war in 1939. And that made everything change. People were being fun and frivolous and had lovely time putting hats on their heads, making them into shoes on their heads, making them into hats. I mean, all that is gorgeous and fun, but probably with the threat of war, people get a bit serious. And when they came back after the war, long time after 1945, people were probably a little chastened. People had died, people's houses were gone, bombed in the war, and all over Europe and all over Britain, and everywhere in America would have happened as well. So would have been affected, I mean. So all that would have made people a bit more utilitarian, and we go for somber colours. They've been careful.
We're not up for a lobster dress anymore.
We're not up for a lobster
or a shoe on a hat. It's just not happening. Okay, and I suppose she refused to conform to that change. She carried on doing.
I mean, it's hard to change, isn't it? If you've been putting buttons, which in the shape of a cicada, or a dress with some hands embroidered onto it, I mean.
It would be asking her to change her artistic way, and that's very, very hard.
Very hard.
And I think that's what I meant, because wasn't she very closely rivaled to Coco Chanel?
Yeah, yeah.
And whilst Coco Chanel changed her way of doing things, she didn't.
Well, she grew with it, and she did the new look, and it all became a very different look, very tailored and tidy. Whereas, of course, Schiaparelli's was all much more exuberant and crazy and arty and all the rest of it. But I love the fact that she was so arty, and I think she might probably be the first fashion designer, I don't know, to bring in that sort of whole thing of artists and working with artists and an artist movement. because it's not just a way of looking at things; it's the way of thinking about things. It's a concept, conceptual things, which is carried on now.
That's carried on to chalk paints, because we talk about furniture art quite a lot, and actually using furniture as a way of conveying art. And she, I suppose, thought of that in the same way with clothes. It's combining the two.
Yes, although I have a thing about calling furniture. I know you do.
I'm pushing your buttons on purpose. You're doing it
deliberately. Yeah, I have a thing about people saying that they're an artist when they paint furniture. I think they're a decorator. I mean, I would call myself a decorative artist, decorative furniture painter, but I'm not an artist. I mean, an artist, you can be an artist. You can paint, actually, you can paint a picture and still not be an artist. For me, an artist is someone who's pushing the boundaries and making making a new concept. I don't want to talk about what I think art is, but I just think decorative art is making something beautiful that fits into your dining room, your sitting room. It gives something gorgeous, and people can do it. It can be just plain blue, or you could be painting the wonderful, like the things that you do. And many of the painters, star painters and painters all over the world do these special things which are just wonderful, and it may be spots or dots or a landscape, whatever.
And no matter what you think of it, and clearly opinionated with that, it does merge those two worlds together, doesn't it? And that's the special thing.
Totally. Well, a designer can be influenced by art all the time. And so I feel that I have bringing art into my pictures all the time. I'm always being influenced by it. And some people say, well, I'm not influenced by art at all. Well, you are, but you don't know it possibly because it's all around us.
So how do you think Schiaparelli continues to influence us today? Because obviously the brand and the legacy is still very much alive and going strong. Lady Gaga wearing a very famous dress, I think it was last year, an awards ceremony. And as a house, it's still very influential. In what ways do you think she and her designs influence our world of kind of painting and interiors and that side of things?
Well, for me, it's a personal thing for me. And I brought out Capri Pink to be that slightly shocking, that slightly naughty look at because pink is like, oh my goodness, I can't have that. But we did a lovely painted piece. Actually, my son Felix did it. He painted a rather elegant sort of 50s, but looking back to a cocoa-y thing, sideboard, and we painted it. Felix painted it Capri, and then put on it a decoupage with gilding on it.
So of a
lobster.
Bringing it back to the lobster.
And, it just looked fantastic. I love it. It's one of my favourite pieces because it has still that little bit of connection. Even if people did not know why the hell there was a lobster on there, it sort of worked hugely. And so for me, whether you know about her or not, there is that wonderful thing about being elegant, but wearing and using a colour which is extremely bright and, i.e. possibly bad taste. But there is a big difference between a bright Barbie pink, which may not have, it doesn't have the sophistication or depth in that colour. So when I make a colour, it's not just a bright pink in there. There's not just a big bright pink pigment. I try to add all sorts of other things in it to make it a sophisticated colour. And so I think that it can be a sophisticated colour without being cheap. So I think sometimes people think, oh, bright pink, a bit cheap and nasty. But it's not.
It's not.
And I think that continues on, and it allows you to use it in design. So one of my favourite designers is, he's dead now, a long time back, but he was called David Hicks, a British designer called David Hicks. Very upmarket, beautiful stuff he did, incredible heritage that he's left. It's incredible. He's beautiful stuff. And one of my favourite rooms, and I was shocked by it when I first saw it, is that he has deep chocolate brown walls, absolutely delicious, and bright, shocking pink, full curtains.
Pink, Capri Pink specifically,
It's a
and
sort of
chocolate brown
Yeah.
are such a good combination.
They're so gorgeous.
Same with blue and brown. Blue and brown, pink and brown.
Yeah.
If it's the right shade of pink, which Capri is,
Yep.
excellent. But you don't have a chocolate colour in the range.
I do have a sort of enfleur.
Mm.
Yeah. So anyway, we'll just have to zip my mouth.
Oh, because there might be more
Well,
colour.
who knows?
Well, just one of the reasons I love chalk paint is that each colour, and we've just taken one colour today, Capri, each one has this amazing thought process behind it. And that I don't see in any other brands. I think so much thought and history and inspiration goes into creating a colour. So it's not just bringing out a pink and calling it a name or a number. It is actually so much more considered than that. And well, at the time of recording this podcast, there are 46 colours in the range, and there have been others that have been discontinued over the years, and there will hopefully be more colours to come. And that's a lot of thought. There's so many colours in the world, but each one is special and unique because it's got so much behind it.
Yeah. Well, thank you. Well, I do try to put a lot into it, and every colour, I see that it matches everything. I add white to it. I add other colours to it to make certain that the colours all work and work together. As you know, there's no black in my paint, and because of that, when you add white to it, it doesn't make a greyed colour. It makes a really beautiful, strong colour, and that it does have a certain sophistication, because if you just put black into a colour, it will make it less sophisticated. And I give it some other bits to it so that it doesn't look like a cheap pink.
And to go off on a small tangent here, for those people listening, they might be thinking, what's chalk paint? What's that for? Very briefly, because it could be an episode in itself. What is chalk paint? And when we're talking about it and furniture, what's it designed for?
It's designed to paint on furniture, but anything else. So it goes on metal, fabric, wood, plaster, brick, plastics. I've probably not mentioned everything, but it more or less goes on everything. And so that you can paint it, and you can paint it in lots of different techniques. It's got my background in fine art, and so that you can do all sorts of things. And my idea is to give it to people with this sort of colour box of colours, and you can mix them in lots of different ways. So you've given everything, and then I hope to give you lots of knowledge about it, to put it together in lots and lots of ways to sort of educate, or not educate, but to help, really.
Yeah.
And, you know, and together we can make this really amazing and gorgeous, because it is such a fascinating subject, I think.
I do too. Now, The Colorist, the name of this podcast, is also the name of your bookazine. So tell us a little bit about that, Annie, if listeners might like to do a little homework before the next episode.
Right. Well, The Colorist is a bookazine. That means it's like between a magazine and a book. It's got no adverts like a book, but it's got lots and lots of articles about lots of different things and lots of gorgeous photos. And each issue is a colour. And so you end up with a sort of colour library. And this Schiaparelli or Schiaparelli Pink, that one is all about that is in issue 6, and it's called Punchy Pink, and you find out lots about it. And you can get those from online, wherever, or on one of our stockists. That would be fantastic.
And I suppose this podcast is really a continuation of everything covered in The Colorist bookazine.
Absolutely.
Hence the same name.
Yeah, exactly.
Well, our first episode has hopefully given everyone a very inspiring introduction to The Colorist and what to expect from future episodes. So speaking of this, Annie, let's see what is going to be the topic for episode 2.
It's going to be pure.
Pure white.
Pure white, that's exactly.
Okay, first thing I'm thinking, which other people might be thinking, is, okay, episode 1, Capri, punchy, vibrant. Wow, it's a really exciting colour. And white for episode 2?
Well, I think you might be surprised. It has a surprising history and quite shocking in its own way.
Interesting. I need to know more about that, and I'm very much looking forward to it. So much more to come, and so many interesting colours and topics left to discuss. So thank you for listening to our first episode. We've done it. That's very exciting. We hope you've enjoyed it. If you'd like to contact us with questions about this episode or future ones, then you can do so on Instagram. That's your best place to contact both of us. My handle is Doghead Designs on Instagram.
And I'm Annie Sloanstagram.
So that is it. Thank you very much.
Yeah.
See you next time.
See you next time.